What to know out of the Air Force Association.
A new push by the Army to get small drones back in the air.
And new technologies to watch for this week. I'm Aaron Mehta.
And I'm Lee Farron.
Welcome to The Breakout. Lee, let's start this week by talking about a little bit of the news that came out of the Air and Space Forces Conference in Colorado last week.
A little more sparse this year than in years past.
A little more sparse than in years past, yeah. So Michael Morrow, our reporter, was there, and he was one of the few people there, it felt like, because there was guidance from the Air Force very last minute saying, hey, actually, a lot of you guys no longer are going.
Yeah, this is kind of in line with the White House's push to cut costs across the federal government. The Air Force came down and said, if you don't have to be there, if you're not already presenting or signed up for important meetings, don't go. And so a lot of the halls were empty, a lot of the conference rooms were fairly empty there.
Yeah, and there was a lot more Space Force people than blue uniforms because it was in Colorado, so there were a lot of people there, and that was kind of an exemption that we saw. But it was notable when Michael talked to industry. They said, yeah, we're having less meetings. Still, the key meetings are still happening, but this was kind of a shock to the system. And the big question now is, does this impact other conferences, not just Air Force, but other services going forward?
Sure, and we'll of course be on the ground at all these other conferences, so we'll let you know about that. But you don't send Michael Morrow to a show and not get news out of it. The guy's going to find some news, and the biggest news was about the Navy, actually.
Yeah, as you'd always expect. So Michael, along with Valentin, our industry reporter, broke the news that Lockheed Martin is no longer in the Navy's 6th generation F/A-XX fighter program.
News. Yeah.
This is big. Look, this is a program that's been largely kept in the black, not a lot of discussion around it. It's almost more discussion on the Air Force side about NGAT, which is their 6th generation separate program. They're not doing the F-35 combo package again, which everyone's very clear about.
Do they have to name it the same thing? Both of them are called NGAT?
Probably just to mess with us.
Yeah.
But the fact that Lockheed is out leaves, based on reporting and public statements, Boeing and Northrop Grumman as the competitors for the Navy jet. On the Air Force side, it's Lockheed and Boeing. So Northrop's not competing for the Air Force, Lockheed's not competing for the Navy. Obviously, whoever wins either of these things, it's basically the future fighter, maybe the last man fighter for each service.
Right, yeah. I mean, it's going to be a huge decision, and the Navy's not, obviously, they haven't made their decision yet about exactly who's going to win. The Air Force has paused its decision about what they're going to do. Everybody's kind of waiting to see what the Trump administration will do on both fronts.
Yeah. So big news. Obviously, we'll be keeping on that going forward. All right, so we're going to follow up on a story that we wrote back in the fall. Ash Roki, who's our Army reporter, wrote a piece back then about how soldiers are taking these cheap little drones that are supposed to be attritable, easy to be lost, and they're actually afraid to use them because of all the red tape around
Afraid to
it.
lose them, yeah, and that's the thing. This is in the middle of a revolution in ground combat we're seeing in Ukraine, where soldiers need drones to assist them in targeting and surveillance and direct attack, all that stuff. The U.S. Army, Ash spoke to soldiers who said that they are afraid to fly the drones because if they lose them, if a gust of wind knocks them into a tree, there's a mandatory investigation, there could be pay loss, all this red tape that comes with losing a small drone, to the point where they're just afraid to take them off the shelves. Now, she's since spoke to more Army officials who say that's not necessarily the case. That is the default knee-jerk response, is to do an investigation, but commanders don't really have to do that.
Yeah, and to Lee's point, if the soldier is found to have lost this equipment, they could actually lose pay, even though the loss of equipment is kind of baked into the assumption of using these technologies.
Right. So there's a new memo coming out that Ash has reported on that is just going to clarify for soldiers that if you lose a small drone, the commander can just write it off. That's not a big deal. One official she talked to said that the culture of the Army right now is to do the investigation because, one, it's the first thing in the manual when you look up what to do if you lost a drone, and two, this kind of came of age when drones were more rare and expensive, and it was a bigger deal if you lost one. But now if every soldier has a small quadcopter, that's no longer viable.
Yeah, and one of the things that really struck out to me about Ash's story last week was that it actually costs more to do the investigation than the loss of the drone itself.
Right. So that memo's coming out sometime, just a few weeks, we hope. We'll be on top of it the whole time. This is a very interesting story we want to keep on top of.
Absolutely. After the break, some more talk about technologies.
At Leonardo DRS, our agility helps bring the ability to dominate in any scenario, on any platform, helping our warfighters accomplish the mission and get home safely. Leonardo DRS, our agility, your advantage.
So what else is going on this week?
Yes, we got two things of note. The first is the satellite conference in Washington. Teresa Hitchens, our space reporter, is going to be there. If you see her, make sure that the force is with her. She loves that. This is an interesting show. It's very in the weeds in some cases. It's got a heavy commercial aspect to it. But it's coming at a time when the U.S. has at least restricted, according to some reports, cut off entirely intel sharing with Ukraine.
Yeah, geopolitics has intruded on it.
Geopolitics has intruded in a big way. It tends to do these days.
Yeah.
And a lot of satellite companies are trying to figure out what that means for them.
So what the rules are, because it's complicated because sometimes the satellite imagery is given to the U.S. and then given to Ukraine. Mm-hmm. If the U.S. is restricting that sharing, then that affects them. But sometimes these companies have agreements with other countries in Ukraine directly. And so that's sure to be a topic of discussion at this show. And then well outside D.C. on the other side of the country is Project Convergence.
Yeah, and Project Convergence is a big annual exercise. Kind of runs, it's really a collection of small exercises that can put in some...
By the Army.
By the Army. It's their contribution to the CJADC2 effort. Ash will be out there for kind of the big media day. It's smaller than it has been in the past. It used to be a couple of days. It's really just one day this time around. But we're looking at technologies like drones, sensors, EW, kind of all the future Army technologies.
It's where the Army just tries out a whole bunch of stuff to see how it works, and then they take those lessons, come back and iterate on them for the future in hopes of getting this stuff into warfighters' hands pretty quickly.
Yeah.
So it'll be curious to see if the new drone memo helps them out also. Like, they can't be afraid to lose new drones if they're doing all these exercises.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, so make sure to like and subscribe to the breakouts so that we can get to you directly. I'm Aaron Mehta.
And I'm Lee Farron.
We'll see you at CTV later.
Ugh.